Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to day 2 of the CILIP Rare Books and Special Collections Group Conference on System Standards and the Discoverability of Special Collections. We're going to get started in a minute. There are various people still arriving, but I think I'll just press on. So welcome to day 2 of the conference. I'm Sarah Cusk, and I'm the Vice Chair of the RBSCG Committee, and I'm going to be moderating the panel this afternoon, our panel on inclusive cataloguing. Yesterday was great, and I think this afternoon looks like it's going to be every bit as interesting and even inspirational. So yeah, strap in is my advice to everyone. Just a few practical things. So the talks are going to be 20 minutes, and we've allowed 30 minutes for each talk. So that leaves us time for questions at the end. And we ask people to put questions, which we hope you will have, into the chat. So don't use the Q&A function, use the chat, because then everybody can read the questions, which we think works slightly better. And then I will go through those in the available time that we have and hope to be able to get to all of them. So I think that at this point, without further ado, we'll get started. Our first talk, which is a recording, is Karen Pearce and Vicky Stallard from Cardiff University talking about forming an anti-racist and inclusive library catalogue. So I'm going to hand over now to Rian, who I think is going to get the video started.
Hello, and thank you to the organisers for including us in this year's Rare Books and Special Collections Group Conference. This will be a joint presentation. I'm going to start off with an introduction to the project we ran at Cardiff University on making our subject headings anti-racist and more inclusive. Then my colleague Vicky Stallard will present on the more technical side of the project. And finally, I will conclude with a brief look at what has taken place post-project. The catalogue is a crucial tool for users of the library, enabling discovery of and access to the physical and online collections and information resources which support teaching, learning and research. Using the catalogue is part of the overall experience of using the library, especially for special collections where shelf browsing is not possible, and thus it should be an inclusive experience that is welcoming to all users. Like many others, the cataloguing team at Cardiff University became increasingly aware of the legacy problems of language, representation and inclusivity within some Library of Congress subject headings and medical subject headings used within the library catalogue. There are a range of problems, but for example, within Library of Congress subject headings for people, the assumption is that the norm is white, male, Christian, heterosexual, non-disabled and cisgendered. In addition, there are other terms that are felt to be discriminatory and inappropriate for who or what is being described. At Cardiff, we were uncertain to what extent problematic headings were used within the library catalogue and the potential harm they might be causing. But we also didn't feel we had the capacity to tackle this issue in a meaningful way alongside a business-as-usual workload. However, we were successful in a bid to HEFCU, the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales, and received funding for a project to create an anti-racist and inclusive library catalogue. This enabled us to employ a project cataloguer to assess the extent of the problem and to propose remedial solutions. Our project cataloguer, Mouse Miller, was with us for about 8 months. Their initial work focused on defining the scope of the project and what we thought was achievable within the time frame. Addressing the issue of racist and or otherwise prejudiced language and subject headings naturally involves conversations on broad, complex and challenging concepts, so it was important to concentrate our efforts on making a measurable difference to our catalogue with the resources we had available. The project was conducted in 4 key stages: researching existing relevant projects and publications, locating harmful subject headings in the catalogue, identifying solutions, and then implementing the proposed remedial actions in a sustainable way. These actions included identification and deletion of inappropriate LCSH and MESH, enhancing records of alternative subject headings agreed on by the team, and written documentation and guidance to ensure the use of inclusive alternative subject headings becomes business as usual. The project would not have been possible without the extensive work already undergone in the sector to combat the limitations of and harm caused by controlled vocabularies. However, at the time of the initial research stage, we felt that although there was a lot of literature discussing the topic, it was predominantly concerned with what the problem was and why things should be changed, rather than the practical how to tackle it. It should be noted, however, that since the end of the project, there has been an increase in more practical papers. The majority of resources consulted placed emphasis on ethical values to guide and inform approaches to the issue. Multiple resources, for example, recommended following the principles and values listed in the Code of Ethics for Cataloguers, an interpretive framework intended for use by cataloguers to inform their decision-making in accordance with best ethical practice. There were numerous resources detailing examples of LCSH and MESH containing offensive and outdated terminology. Most notably, Cataloguing Labs, Problem, LCSH, and Medical Subject Funnel, and the Inclusive Terminology Glossary created by Carissa Chu in collaboration with the National Library of Scotland as part of the Inclusive Terminology Project. The Chu Glossary was found to be the most comprehensive and contemporary source on harmful language available, offering the largest compilation of terms which could be searched within the catalogue later during the project's scoping exercise. Although its focus is not subject headings within controlled vocabularies, the glossary was found to be useful when cross-referenced with those vocabularies. Following on from the research aspect of this project, a scoping exercise was conducted with the aim to determine if subject headings containing incorrect and offensive terminology were in use in the library catalogue. It was fully expected that they were, and if so, what these inappropriate headings were. We also needed to determine the source of the headings, be it LCSH, MESH, local or undetermined, and the extent to which the catalogue was affected. Just how many records and headings would we be dealing with? What was the scale of the problem? Taking the terms in the Inclusive Terminology Glossary, after excluding duplicate and inoffensive terms, we had 1,897 terms to be searched for within the catalogue. After finding limitations within ALMA's advanced search by subject and the browse bibliographic headings, the systems team at Cardiff University devised a customised report to retrieve all relevant records assigned with subject headings containing the search term entered. Made available via the CU cataloguing dashboard in ALMA Analytics, the subject headings report can be run at any time by staff with CU cataloguing access. We discovered that only 200 of the terms searched for appeared in the catalogue. The report results were subsequently reviewed to determine how many records each term affected and ascertain the context of each term. This was necessary in many cases, as several of the search terms were appropriate in some contexts, but inappropriate in others. For example, the term exotic is applicable when describing flora and fauna, but highly inappropriate to describe people of colour. It was decided that only terms which could be confirmed as harmful would be actioned within the scope of the project due to time constraints and available resources. The review findings concluded that action was required for 50% or 100 of the terms located, substantially reducing the number of records considered for editing from 31,512 to 8,235. After identifying the problematic terms contained within the library catalogue and how many bibliographic records this affected, a number of recommendations were presented to deal with the problem. Primarily, we needed to determine alternatives to the outdated subject headings using authorised LCSH and/or MESH, as had been suggested in the literature. Agreed alternatives were compiled into a department glossary that the cataloguing team could refer to and adapt going forward. These terms were then used to update the problematic headings. This was done by utilising normalisation rules to make bulk changes to the majority problem headings, as will be explained by my colleague, Vicky Stallard.
I'm going to take you through the technical part of the project work, starting with an outline. At Cardiff University, we use ALMA Library Management System and Primo VE Discovery Layer, both from Ex Libris. We're also lucky to have a sandbox environment to test everything in first. ALMA Analytics provides data on all areas of our systems, including physical and electronic inventory. We used analytics to provide reports to identify bibliographic records with outdated subject headings in need of attention. Our team built a set of reports on a dashboard in analytics to allow the project staff to check subject headings themselves. One limitation of analytics is that we can't search just the 650 field, hence the explanatory text on the dashboard about which mark fields are being searched in this report. Analytics also doesn't contain the first and second indicators of the bibliographic records. Here's the results of a delimited search showing the subject headings separated out into different columns, making it a bit easier to see. This screenshot shows you behind the scenes in analytics and how we build the reports, and it shows the filters that we've used to eliminate records that we can't edit from the community zone and only including records that are in the repository, that is, not deleted records. The next step was to check existing jobs that ALMA runs. ALMA has several jobs relating to authority headings, including the preferred term correction job that runs daily. This example shows the updated subject headings in the 650s in our live environment on the left and in our sandbox environment pre-correction on the right. If we look at the second example, oil spills, in the live environment, it's Gulf of America in the $Z, but in the sandbox, it's still saying Gulf of Mexico. So you can see the old heading before Library of Congress updated it. It should be noted that the preferred term correction job only runs on new or edited bibliographic records. It doesn't handle the preferred term correction on migrated records, which is why we had so many that needed tidying up. We did look at alternative tools like MarkEdit, which some of you may be familiar with. It has benefits in that it shows indicators. You can choose which particular fields to manipulate, but we didn't have much experience with it, so we decided to stick with using ALMA and its tools, which led us to normalization rules to change the bib records themselves, and Primo VE display rules to only change the display. I'll cover this in a bit more detail. Final bit of the technical work was going back to analytics at the end of the project and providing a new report which is emailed to the cataloguing team once a month and picks up any new or edited records from the previous month which have a particular subject heading that we've included in the report. Looking at the normalization rules in a little bit more detail, normalization rules are used to change or update bibliographic metadata at various stages and can be specific to certain conditions. This makes large numbers of changes very easy to manage. You can see in these two examples, one is a bit more straightforward and one is a bit more complicated. There were lots of different subject headings to change, and not all of them were done using norm rules. Where there were only a few records with the heading in ALMA, these were manually changed as it was quicker and easier to do that than writing a rule just for a handful of records. You can use norm rules when importing records during editing and saving of records, as well as using them to run a job on a set of records. We chose to save sets of records and run those jobs. Mouse created sets having identified records using the dashboard reports. The example shows the subject heading Aborigine, which has 18 records in the set. We did have some sets which had up to and over 300 records for some of the headings. The norm rules are created and stored in the metadata editor in ALMA, which is where our cataloguing team create and edit all bib records. Working from Mouse's instructions on which headings were to be replaced with what, I created different rules to cover the various requirements. Some were straight replacements of one heading for another, some had a heading replacement plus a subfield, or a replacement and a new 650 field being added. In writing the various rules, I used the split screen in the MDE to check the rule using bib records from the sets. The bib record is on the left. You put the rule in the right-hand side of the screen, click on preview, and then you will see how the bib displays after the norm rule is applied, and we can see the highlighted fields. This makes it easy to make iterative changes to the rule and troubleshoot as you go along. You can also see additional 997 fields that were added as part of the rule. The second one, check LCSH subfield order, was only added to certain rules where the subfield order needed to be checked, but the first rule, subject headings updated as part of the project, that was added to all records that went through this process. This was included so that we can use either the advanced search in ALMA or ALMA Analytics to see how many or which records have been updated as part of the project. Rules were all ready to run. The next step was creating the normalization process in ALMA, seen here, by adding a process and selecting the appropriate norm rule. This was then run using a job. You select the job and then you select the set to run it on. When the job has run, I would go back and select the set that we've just run the job on, check a few of the records and make sure that the changes had been made as expected. This was repeated for all the sets and rules. For headings where there was either no good replacement or the heading was likely to be updated soon, we agreed to use the Primo VE display rules. This means that the bibliographic metadata stays the same, but it doesn't show in the discovery layer. The display rules are found in the display configuration area of Alma, and I had to edit the out-of-the-box Mark 21 normalization rule for display for the subject field. I edited the 650 field rule and also the 655 rule. The edited rule shows the list of replace string commands, each of which is changing a subject heading in the display. In this example, you can see the string being replaced is learning disabled children being replaced with a display of children with learning disabilities. If in Primo VE library search, I search for an exact phrase in the subject of learning disabled children, look at the result, and then look at the details of that full record, you can see in the subject that it actually says children with learning disabilities as the display rule, instead of the outdated heading. This example is a bit more detailed and uses regular expressions to replace the heading if followed by a full stop or by a subfield. But it also flags a limitation of the way we've used it. If in the result you click on the link for the subject with the display heading, you won't find any more records as that heading doesn't appear as a subject heading in metadata of any records. You can do further work on adding local headings, which would help with this issue, but we haven't done that yet. And then finally, back to the monthly report for containing particular subject headings in new or edited records from the past month. This is what the report looks like in Analytics with all of the various subject headings listed. We update and amend that as and when necessary. The report is emailed monthly to the cataloguing team, but you can also run it on demand from the dashboard mentioned earlier. You can see the local 997 field is contained in the results, so the cataloguing team can easily see whether the record has already been looked at previously. If there are new records which need attention, then the cataloguers can add the 997 field to the record to show that it has been checked or updated and to ensure consistency in the wording. I added controlled vocabulary to Alma. They start typing in the 997 $A field and select one of the three controlled fields, so acknowledgement, reviewed, or updated as appropriate. Once they've selected it and saved the record, it will then show in the metadata of the record and again can be found by searching in Advanced Search in Alma or in Analytics. That's a whistle-stop tour of the technical work, and now it's back to Karen.
Mouse left at the end of January 2024, having accomplished a huge amount for the project, really demonstrating what can be achieved when you have dedicated staff time. Alongside Vicky, they had ensured that all the identified changes had been made in the catalogue and the monthly report set up to run, although they left before the first monthly report was produced. The first monthly list was larger than expected, and it was necessary to build upon Mouse's work and create some very basic instructions to ensure the whole team were comfortable with what they had to do. A 997 note is added to all records that are flagged to indicate that headings have been updated or reviewed. The addition of the note means that the record has been amended and is thus potentially flagged the following month if the trigger term is still contained within the headings. For example, blacksmith is flagged because it contains blacks within its structure. This will not be changed, and so will recur the following month as the addition of the 997 note has amended the record. The monthly lists have now been happily absorbed into business as usual, with any problems being discussed at our monthly team meetings. The statement of harmful language was added to our library web pages in October 2024, with a link from Library Search, or Primo, added a few weeks later. The text was predominantly written by Mouse, but needed to be discussed and approved by the library's EDI group and the senior management team. Discussions were also held about where best to place the text, both on the web pages and on the library catalogue. The text was then also translated into Welsh. We know that many library services across the country are adding these statements to their web pages or catalogues, and we're thus pleased that we'd also achieved this. In spring 2025, we knew it was time to tackle our first annual review. We've learned a lot in this process and have made decisions about how to tackle the next review differently. The task was quite daunting, despite the guidance notes we had been left, and involved a variety of checks being split across the team members. This included the TEW glossary, Library Congress monthly lists, mesh updates, and the Cataloguing Labs problem LCSH list. The largest job was going through the TRUE Inclusive Terminology Glossary to identify any changes or added headings. This task was completed by 2 members of the team. Ultimately, we felt that we were just duplicating the original work done by Mouse, with little additional benefit. Although the glossary had been crucial in the early stages of the project and had given us a solid ground to work upon, by performing near identical checks on our annual review, it was not felt to be a good use of time. Our decision has been made not to do this check in future reviews, with an assessment of this decision in 5 years' time. The team discussed all items on the Cataloguing Labs list of problem headings, identifying any we thought should be added to our glossary and acted upon. We are currently making manual checks on records that contain these headings. As you can see, the whole review process is taking up a lot of time. Ultimately, we wanted the project to be sustainable going forward, and not just something useful we did in 2023 that stayed stuck in time. The monthly reviews were part of this process, maintaining a constant check on the catalogue of the identified terms. But the annual review is also crucial in ensuring the checks and terms are kept up to date, which is why we need to streamline it and make it work for us. The checking of the LCSH monthly lists has been moved from an annual check to a monthly check, which makes much more sense and ensures we're up to date more quickly than by leaving it to once a year. Mesh updates are once per year, so they've been left to the annual review, as has the Cataloguing Lab check for the moment. This is a dynamic list, but quite subjective. This year's check of the list gave us a lot of food for thought, and we made several changes and updates. It is not easy to see what is new in this list, so it works better for an annual check rather than a monthly one. We can, however, adapt things as we go along, as we find out what works best for our team and keeping the momentum going. In addition, as being part of the WELF Consortium, the Welsh Higher Education Libraries Forum, we're helping to bring about a Welf-wide adoption of the Cataloguing Code of Ethics, with our project being one of the case studies. Some key takeaways. External funding gave us the opportunity to have a dedicated staff member to focus all their time and energy on the project for a fixed period of time, and an awful lot was achieved because of that. In an ideal world, this would have been a permanent post, enabling us to have someone focusing on race equality and EDI issues within the catalogue and the wider library service. We're now back to working on these issues as an add-on to our daily jobs, albeit with having had a boost from the project. Keeping other staff members up to date. It's easy for those involved in the project to forget that staff around them are not as involved and may not be keeping up with the progress being achieved. When Mouse were with us, they presented at several of our library staff briefings, and both they and myself spoke at a couple of the senior management team meetings. This meant that other library staff were aware of what was going on, at least at a general level, and had opportunities to ask questions and find out more. There were also obviously regular updates at the cataloguing team monthly meetings. The reports and normalisation rules have been set up, can be easily run, amended, and potentially shared, so that if other institutions want to do something similar, they can utilise the work we have done. By presenting our work, we hope to inspire and to make it easier for others to engage in something similar. We want to share the how, because that was what we found was lacking in the literature. And to this end, we were delighted to publish 2 articles on the project in Catalogue and Index earlier this year. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That was a fascinating talk. We've got Karen here to answer questions, and I think Vicky can't be with us. But thank you, Karen, for being here. If people can put their questions in the chat, that would be brilliant, and I'll do my best to get to all of them. But I actually do have a question, first of all, if that's okay, which I hope isn't too much of a kind of large question or a meta question, which is that it seems to me that this is amazingly valuable and exciting work, but it's a bit invisible to the users of library catalogues unless they come to the library catalogue with already an understanding of how some of these terms are problematic. And you did presentations for staff members and senior management. Have you presented this to any of the users of your catalogue, or have you had any feedback from users?
That's a really interesting question. The answer is no, we haven't presented to users. I don't think we had actually considered that, so I will definitely take that back to the team to think about. We, on our statement on harmful language, there is a feedback option, so that's on our library catalogue and on our library web pages. So if somebody comes along and spots something that they believe is offensive or they don't understand, they can directly email the team to query this. So far, nobody has done so. But yes, it might well be worth getting the subject librarians to bring it up at their sort of induction talks to mention that this is something that's been going on, to maybe publicize it and make the users think about the language that's there. But yeah, no, that's very interesting. I'll definitely take that back.
Particularly in the current climate, I think it's which takes me to Tabitha's question: was there any dilemma about changing Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America?
As far as I'm concerned, no. Yeah, I just wanted that done. It's very hard because we're UK, but our subject headings are tied. Library of Congress and MESH are both American, and their Library of Congress especially is very tied up in the political system. So there's quite a dilemma going on there. But we felt that no, that was something we wanted to change. It's still in Alma. That the LC term is still in Alma, but the display will display as Gulf of Mexico rather than the Gulf of America. So if you search for the new term, you will find the records that it's in, but it won't display.
I think Mikkel, who's one of our speakers later, asked a question which is on the same theme, which is, do you know if any of these offensive terms remain in the official regulations? By which I think he means, are they still authorized subject headings, Library of Congress subject headings? So do you ever find anything which needs to be changed? Yes, you want to explain that process to people who don't understand it. I think that if you found an offensive term in a record in your catalogue and you want to change it, how do you interact with the Library of Congress as far as that's concerned?
We basically take a look at what that term's supposed to be about, and is there anything within Library of Congress or MESH that is an alternative that could be used? Maybe it's a higher level or slightly different, because we don't have a funnel to Library of Congress ourselves. We're not a SACO contributors. The National Library of Wales do contribute subject headings, so we do have a kind of an avenue to put forward terms. When I read the question, I initially wondered if it was about sort of legal documentation. So there are specific terms that are enshrined in legal documentation, but again, because LCSH is American rather than UK, we might have different terms. But we have recently come across some terminology that has a legal definition in the UK, and we're sort of looking at those, and if we can provide any alternatives, if we find that they are offensive, is there something we can work around this? Because if it's a legal term in a legal document, then partly it needs to be there so that you can find it within the document, or know that you're talking about a specific legal point. But if it's offensive, then we don't really want to be displaying it.
Thank you. So Zoe Marshall has asked for links to the articles, which I think you have. There's a link further down.
I will add them in a minute.
Okay,
yes,
fantastic.
Yeah.
And then a question from Laura: if an institution is wanting to create a more inclusive catalogue, where would be the best place to start?
I'd say read our articles. That will give you some idea, give you more detail about how we did it. It's trying to think, what can you do with the staff time that you've got? And I think every little helps. You might not be able to run a big project, but if you can start changing either in your display of language or finding alternative language. Yeah, if you look at the articles, there are also there's bibliography in there to other projects as well, so you might find some inspiration in those. But do look at the literature that's out there, because none of us want to reinvent the wheel. It's if somebody else has done a good thing, then we're all librarians, we all like to help one another, and we're quite happy to share any our reports or anything like that. If anybody wants anything, please do get in touch. We're happy to help with what we've already done.
Perhaps, Karen, you could put your contact details in the chat as well. If you're happy for people to get in touch, that would be great. Vance Wood says, Primo VE rule, does lack of display affect searchability?
Yeah. So if you search for the original term that is hidden, it will bring up the records. If you search for the term that we have put in the display, it won't. We did discuss this as an issue, because we thought it might be confusing for people, but it was going to be quite a lot of work for Vicky to amend the rule for every single term. So we we sort of held off to see if anyone complained, and so far nobody has come forward and complained to us. But it's one of those things. It's on the back burner. If we have time, we will go and see if we can do that. But unfortunately, yes, the indexing isn't there with the replacement term that is being shown if it's a display term.
Thank you. Yvette Campbell is moving on, I think, a bit from my question. Do you engage with users of the library catalogue themselves to let them know about the work, or allow them to submit suggestions or to flag content that they may feel is outdated or inappropriate? And do you provide a statement on potential harmful language in your collections?
So yes, we do have the statement. It's in our library catalogue, and it's also on the web pages. Originally, during the project, Mouse wanted to run some focus groups with students, but there wasn't the scope within the project to do that. There wasn't the time or the funding to be able to do that. This is something I'm probably going to take back to our EDI group to see if we can start engaging with the students. It's because at the moment it's quite passive. You know, we've got the statements on our web pages, but how often does a student actually read statements on web pages? I don't know. I think we probably do need to start taking it out to the user base, publicising what we've done.
Thank you. The next question, Katie Birkwood has asked a question asking about other people's opinions about implementing the CVRMC genre terms. The question's in the chat and people can read it. I wonder whether, Katie, we have 2 minutes left. I mean, do you have something, Karen, that you could say about that? And then maybe people can contribute their experience or their thoughts in the chat.
I have to admit my ignorance. I don't think I've come across the CVRM and C genre terms, so that'll be something I will go and look at.
Yes, I'm sure that's something. I mean, if people could put stuff in the chat, that would be great, because I don't want us to shut that conversation down. But we're running out of time a bit. How often is Cardiff planning to periodically return to this? Is another question.
We've got an annual review. Like I said, that we're still in the process of the annual review at the moment, the first annual review, but it will be an annual thing. We want to continually be looking at this because terminology changes all the time. So something we might have amended might become itself offensive in the future, or LC might catch up and do something. We want to go back and use their term. So it's definitely an ongoing process, and we're trying to embed it more into our business as usual work. So it's always something that we're thinking about.
I think we've only got time for one more question, I'm afraid, and it's going to be the next question in the list, which is from Sonia Llewellyn. Did you cover offensive terms in places other than subject headings, like in offensive titles?
No, we didn't. We were only looking at the subject headings. We talked about titles, and of course, you know, that's a whole other thing to look at. But it's, you know, if that's what's on the original document, the original work, you can't really hide that, which I suppose is what the statement of harmful language is, that there's a warning. You know, I know some institutions have placed active warnings on individual items that they believe have like offensive titles. So some of our colleagues in Wales have done that at item level, specifically the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama have done that, so that will flag up an item. We haven't had the capacity to look at if what items we have that might be needed in, but we're always open for responses to come in from staff and students.
Brilliant, thank you. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the chat, but Christine McGowan has said that she and Katie are going to be talking about CVRMC tomorrow, so we can revisit that. Thank heavens we can have that chat properly tomorrow. Anyway, for the timing, thank you so much, Karen. That was a really, really fascinating talk, and please give our thanks to Vicky as well. It's sorry that she couldn't be here, but really, really great to have you here. So Mariette Hale and Tabitha Tuckett from UCL, there they are, talking about hitting the mark. Very funny, thank you. Cataloging standards and the challenge of representation.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks, Harriet, for getting the slides up. So I'm going to start with a mention of last year's conference, which ended with a suggestion that catalogue records for rare printed material should resemble archive catalogues a bit more closely in giving broader context and interpretation, and that Mark was perhaps not the best, one of the things that was inhibiting this. Well, we're going to put some challenges to that, and also some suggestions of how that enhanced information is already provided or could be provided in the future. We're particularly interested in increasing visibility for hidden, marginalised or underrepresented voices in rare printed collections. So while what we're discussing could be applied to many elements of a record, today we're going to focus on the significance of names, as these are such a key access point in a record. So for I know there are some non-library cataloguers in the audience and some people from the archives background. So I thought it might be interesting actually for all of us to see what we've traditionally been aiming to do when we catalogue rare printed published material, because I think some of the challenges we're going to talk about might involve us working across these three different types of fields. So we're trying to capture that tension between duplication and uniqueness to describe both what the item has in common with other copies and what's unique about that particular copy and its context. And that's how it's different from archive cataloguing. And as most of you know, we have different mark fields that serve different purposes. First of all, consistent description of the bibliographic entity. That's what's been duplicated through print or publication so that we can match our copy with other copies held across collections. And that's something that archives don't usually have that need. So for consistency, we use controlled vocabularies and uniform titles and name authorities, such as fields in the 100s and 700s. And that's where we're going to start in our talk today. Secondly, we try to describe bibliographic variations. That's particularly for hand-printed items, which version of an edition our copy was as it came off the press or as it went onto the market. And we use precise transcription fields in the title and imprint, among other things. Now, we might add more accessible versions, such as translations of Latin or of Roman numerals. But if we don't have the transcription, the precise transcription, then we can miss who was involved in a book's production. We're going to hear some examples in a minute. And then finally, of course, we describe what's unique about that particular copy. And this is where we are parallel with archives. What's unique about that copy and its biography since its creation. And for this too, we might add extra context and references. And I'm thinking about fields like 561, 562, 563, the new, relatively new 361 or 581 fields. And as for archives, our challenges there include making copy-specific features searchable or indexable, especially getting the front-end platforms such as Primo to enable readers to search all the granular mark-coded information that we painstakingly add to the back-end records. Now, voices are missing from all three elements, but today we're going to start off by talking about name authority systems. So I'm going to hand over to Harriet now.
Thanks. With apologies to those who are already print cataloguers. Name authorities are a controlled vocabulary of the names that are used in bibliographic records to avoid duplication of identities and link together records by the same contributor. And the Library of Congress name authority file, which we use at UCL, is the primary source of authority data across the English-speaking world. There are a total of over 11 million names in the name authority file, including not just personal names, but also corporate bodies, uniform titles, and geographic names. Here is an example of a bibliographic record in our library management system, ALMA. In the 700 field, I've circled Selwyn Oxley, a major donor in our collections on deaf education. And this is what the authority looks like for Selwyn Oxley, containing the same authorised name heading circled at the top, alongside biographical details. For example, the 372 being his field of activity, services for deaf people, and 374, various occupations of his, and so on. And the 670 fields are the sources used for the biographical information included. Now, what is NACO? NACO is the Name Authority Cooperative Programme for the PCC, the Programme for Cooperative Cataloguing. It's a programme through which different libraries, not just internally at the Library of Congress, can contribute and edit Library of Congress name authorities. Some larger libraries, particularly legal deposit libraries in this country, contribute individually as institutions. But this is quite a big commitment and has been off-putting in the past for libraries with smaller cataloguing teams. There can also be associated costs, for instance, with the software used to create authorities, and in the past, the training, though this is now conducted for free online. The NACO UK funnel was founded in 2022 and the funnel channels the work of multiple libraries into NACO together and avoids some of the commitments of being a full NACO member, chiefly the minimum number of submissions that full NACO members need to contribute in a given time period. And UCL joined this funnel in 2024 after discussions about wanting more control over name authorities, particularly within special collections where a lot of research had been carried out into names, some of which Tabitha will cover next.
Thanks very much, Harriet. So, of course, not everybody involved in the production and life of a rare printed item has historically received a name authority record in the international database, so-called international database, while some are overrepresented, and many of us are well aware of this. But I thought it would help us to really identify and focus on who is missing and why. So first, perhaps not surprisingly, it's the unnamed. Recent research in book history has highlighted the role of many unnamed agents who can't easily be represented in catalogue records using the current name authority system, such as paper makers, rag pickers, even workers on plantations who grew the cotton to make the clothes that made the paper. But we also commonly come across former owners and those who interacted with rare printed items, perhaps by underlining or doodling, although not always reading the verbal text, but who nevertheless didn't leave their names. Harriet, can we have the next slide, please? Sorry, we're having to work in a partnership here. Secondly, people who are missing maybe the named but the unknown, which is a slightly different thing. Name authorities understandably depend on authoritative reference sources, but these duplicate historical biases. And sometimes we know a name but nothing at all about who it refers to. So those missing include the unidentifiable, those ordinary owners who record untraceable names in family Bibles, dictionaries, needlework manuals, and so on. They might include the forgotten, those who are absent from our modern reference sources, but very much celebrated in their own time. And this is more frequent than you might think. And that's why older print-only reference sources beyond Wikipedia are so important. And we're going to show in a minute how pressing and urgent that need is. They include the undistinguished or the underprivileged or the unnotorious. They haven't got into the public record. They never got published. They never held public office. They never bought up large collections. They never received an entry in national biographies. And finally, of course, those outside the more Anglo-centric or US-centric sphere of the authorities database. This example here of John Harrington's 1591 edition of Ariosto's Orlando Furioso is signed by Mary and Margaret Rich and others and records Robert and Elizabeth's marriage, as you can see in that inscription. But before you get excited, this is not verifiably the Countess of Warwick, Mary Rich, and her family. We can't unequivocally match these names with any authority record. So how do we represent those in the catalogue record? Now, on to the next slide. Finally, there are those with an indirect relation to names, and they include, for example, former enslaved people who sometimes were named after their owners during slavery, women who changed their names on marriage, those referred to only by their role, for example, widow of, lady, milady, madame. And the Latin for widow, vedua, ironically illustrates why we do need both the transcription fields and any interpretation or translation, because if we remove the transcription, we can no longer search by those terms to identify such obliquely named people in our collections. This example here is an 1841 abolitionist pamphlet, which UCL's catalogue formerly attributed to African-American abolitionist William Howard Day. But as a result of the project I'm going to talk about in a minute, it was in fact written by white British abolitionist, also called William Day. So that's an example of the kinds of mistakes. And one more example here. This is an 1813 illustrated Dante, illustrated by Sofia Giacomelli, who's also known as Sophie Gianninet or Geneviève Sophie Billet or Madame Chomel. You can see the catalogue has just added that. This book is also signed by Elizabeth Crystal, who's an aspiring printmaker, but who wasn't born into the trade. Now, Sofia Giacomelli was extremely celebrated in her day, but little remembered now. So let's have the next slide. What can we do to identify those who are missing from the records? Well, at UCL some years ago, we ran a project called Liberating the Collections, and many of you have heard me talk about this at a previous conference with my colleague Erica Delbecq. We simply asked volunteers to search the public online catalogue to identify rare printed items under a number of themes for collections where we didn't have a good understanding or knowledge of their diversity. And on the next slide here, you can see the themes that we chose. We didn't focus on areas where we already knew we had more diverse materials. And we ended up with a spreadsheet of a couple of thousand items with several more thousand names that were absent or incorrectly entered or uncontextualized in our catalogue records. So that was great. What could we do with these findings to help incorporate some of those hidden names? How could we exploit the name authority system to help with visibility? And I'm going to hand over to Harriet to talk a little bit about the work that she's been doing. Oh, Harriet, I think you need to unmute.
Sorry. Now I'm going to go into some examples of authorities I've edited and created to try and improve the visibility of names at UCL. One of the first authorities I edited was that of Sonia Brownell, who was the wife of George Orwell towards the end of his life in 1949 to 1950. And Sonia donated much of George Orwell's library to UCL under her maiden name, Sonia Brownell. However, originally the authority record was very brief and required editing to link to the name Brownell. Whilst there was a variant for Orwell, Sonia Brownell, this is not particularly helpful as it would still have filed under Orwell and not have been discoverable by searching for the surname Brownell. To further complicate things, Sonia later married Michael Pitt Rivers from 1958 to 1965, and another authority had been created for Sonia Pitt Rivers, as she published as a translator during this time. Whoever created this authority must have not realised that Sonia Orwell and Sonia Pitt Rivers are the same person, as usually you'd either add the information to an existing authority or link them together if the name is considered an alternate identity, for example, a pseudonym. This is the Sonia Orwell authority after my extensive edits. I've added more of her own biographical details to flesh out the record more than just wife of Orwell, and in particular made sure there were variant names for her maiden name and second married name so that she was discoverable through both of these. There are quite strict rules about changing the main entry. Sorry, apparently I can't scroll in this. Changing the main entry, the 100 field of the authority. And it is usually only justified if there are errors or if the person overwhelmingly used a different name. As Sonia Orwell did publish as an editor under Sonia Orwell, probably most extensively, and in fact was still using the name Orwell in her will, it didn't seem justified to change the main entry, but at least I feel satisfied I've added those variant names and more context to the record, and also got rid of the duplicate for Sonia Pitt Rivers if they're the same person. These are two examples of a couple of women printers we have in our collections, researched by one of our Liberating the Collections volunteers, Sarah D'Amico, who did a huge amount of research, particularly into printers in Italy, searching archival records to confirm their work. You may be forgiven for not noticing they're in fact women printers, as neither is mentioned in the publication statement. The first, Lavinia Komarek, printed under Stamperia del Komarek. She was the widow of Giovanni Giacomo Komarek and was active in the printing house after her husband's death and then again after her son's death. When her husband, Giovanni Giacomo Komarek, was still alive, he was named on the imprint, but she's never directly named, and as such, he has a name authority, but she doesn't. The second is Lucina Ravani, who printed under her son's name and company, Fautore de Ravani e Compagnie. And she's never directly named on the text. Again, her son does have a name authority, but she doesn't. This is the authority in progress for Lucina Ravani. It can be difficult to know what to put in the authority record for someone who isn't directly named on the resource. The PCC gives advice specifically about printers' widows that allows a woman's name to be the main entry of an authority, even if she's never directly named on the resource, which is in contrast to how things are normally done for authors and such, where the main entry is chosen as the name that most frequently occurs in texts. A variant name can be given with the male printer and widow of, but in this case it's a little more complicated. It's her son's name on the imprint, and I don't think there's really much of a precedent for mother of. Sometimes it's difficult to create an authority that both honours the women's contributions and also makes them searchable, when someone may only have the book in hand that has a male name or a printing house. For this particular authority, I'm considering creating a corporate body for Vittorio Ravani and Company, which can then link to Lucina Ravani, so she'll still be discoverable even if the only information on the book is the printing house. For former owners, there can be even more challenges. We may have no information at all about a person other than the inscription and the knowledge they existed after the book was printed. Even if there's a full legible name, which is not always the case, how do we verify their identity? This is an example for another of Liberating the Collections volunteers, Stephanie Carter. It's an inscription entitled From the Principles of Political Economy in 1825. And Stephanie suggested that this inscription may be the Caroline Darwin, who was the sister of Charles Darwin. I compared the inscription against multiple letters from the Darwin Correspondence Project of the University of Cambridge and confirmed it was very likely to be the same Caroline Darwin, given the signature. Caroline Darwin did not at the time have an authority, so I created one. Much like Sonia Orwell, Caroline Darwin's most frequent latest usage before her death was her married name, Wedgwood, so I created a main entry for Caroline Wedgwood with the varied name Caroline Darwin. As a contrast to Caroline Darwin, whose life is fairly well documented, I want to show an inscription of an individual as yet unidentified. This is in Barlow's Complete English Dictionary from 1772, and the name is Mary Thedham, one of the many names in our rare dictionary collection, most of which are unidentified former owners. Many left nothing but a name, and dictionaries were common in many households, not just those with extensive private libraries. Often these former owners are not well documented. It can be particularly difficult with popular names like Mary. This one is unusual, in fact, in including a death date and linking between two people who must have known each other, John Townsend and Mary Thedham. You can see that he's written an inscription in memory of Mary Thedham. Even so, easy mistakes can make people undiscoverable. A previous catalogue has misread Thedham as Shedham, but you can see that if you compare the T in Townsend and the T of Thedham, it's almost certainly Thedham rather than Shedham. The death date may also be misread. The previous catalogue has put 1801, but I'll venture it may actually be 1805 as there's a sort of S shape to the final one. The best link I can find for the spelling of the name is various Dorset marriage records, but really there's no way to fully confirm this unless other documentation for Mary Thedham has endured somewhere. But unlike Caroline Darwin, this is unlikely, a common issue when trying to document the lives of ordinary people.
Thanks, Harriet. So in the very final few minutes, we wanted to just throw out some points for discussion about what we can do in the future to improve this situation. And some of these challenges have already been answered at this conference. So first, we might need to think about beyond name authorities and look at how we can best contextualize the people who've produced and interacted with rare printed items with links to reference sources and other collections from libraries, archives, museums. Imagine if you could link up those some of those people with collections across the world through their catalogue records. But how can we best integrate those links into the record? And this could involve working across the three different kinds of fields I talked about at the start. And of course, looking at MARC and BibFrame and linked open data. And we've heard earlier about Igloo and Sinopia and linking to ALMA and the possibilities of BibFrame. But secondly, which reference sources should we prioritise for our readers? Wikidata and Wikipedia are starting to be automatically integrated into authority records, but what can we do to ensure that other, often more reliable but older sources or less Anglo-centric sources appear in the authority records? And Primo, of course, has now introduced its new knowledge boxes, and Lambeth Palace Library has experimented with displaying pop-up internal authority records. Excuse me, Senate House Library has experimented with a sidebar of links to national and other catalogues and other resources. I'm going to hand over to Harriet just to talk a little bit about knowledge boxes in case you haven't come across them yet.
So we'll be brief, so we don't have much time left. But so far at UCL, we've only really scratched the surface. I mean, Library of Congress authorities are quite a conventional way of doing things, even though we haven't been doing them at UCL for a long time. And a major issue is that they're usually invisible to users unless you're directly searching the Library of Congress, and primarily useful to librarians. But these knowledge boxes, as shown in UCL Explore, which is a version of Primo, pull in Library of Congress authority data and also Wikidata and Wikipedia information to show this little bio of Charles Darwin alongside the bibliographic record. This is a screenshot from Leeds University, I think, who are in attendance, so thank you. But we're not currently doing this at UCL, but we are considering it. And to use this kind of feature, authority control seems really crucial as the information is featured very prominently, so you want to be able to edit it if it's wrong. the prominence of Wikimedia also calls into question whether we should be also editing names in Wikidata and Wikipedia if information like that will potentially be pulled into bibliographic records. We do this a little at UCL. I try to include links to Wikidata in my authority records and reciprocal links in Wikidata to Library of Congress where they exist. But this isn't currently a large part of our work. And this is what happens when you actually click on that knowledge box and it gives a further bio, which it says see more on Wikipedia. I don't know if Tabitha wants to mention anything about this, or next slide for you.
Well, maybe we can talk about Wikipedia
Okay.
in the chat afterwards. So another challenge is, of course, indexing these hidden voices, and some particularly archivists actually have been experimenting with tagging, such as gender tags, but these risk applying tags anachronistically and so possibly misidentifying someone from a very different culture or value system. So I think they are still problematic. Mark now, of course, has structured genre headings and other relatively new structured fields, such as the 361, that might help readers to search by particular features, but the control vocabulary might not match what's needed, either within or across collections or institutions or disciplines. And of course, it doesn't link to the names. And it's also potentially confusing for those institutions that attach all copies of a particular edition or state onto a single bib record, creating in some platforms a sort of confusing display of copy-specific notes for different copies. And I know there was some discussion of that yesterday. At UCL a while ago, we started using the public 590 field to display a unique character string, for example, Dante collection with no space in the middle, so it doesn't pull up a collection or Dante, but only things that we've added tag into. We initially used it as a form of classification or collection name, but of course it could be added to say, for example, women printer with no space, and it's repeatable. So that's one way we could do things, but other people use 590s in other ways. And again, other people don't have individual separate bib records for each copy. I'm going to hand over to Harriet. We're aware we've run over time, just to talk about Alma Digital.
Okay, so very quickly, I mean, I'm not an expert on Alma Digital, but as a cataloguer, something we've been doing to improve the visibility of former owners is by using Alma D, where we attach images of the inscription or other provenance information to the bibliographic record. So anyone searching our catalogue can see the images, and those with specialist knowledge and researchers can hopefully suggest more information when we have unidentified former owners. Also, one of our MSc courses this year, Crowdsourced and Citizen Data for Cultural Heritage, recently used crowdsourcing to attempt to identify some of our undeciphered inscriptions. So that's things that weren't legible.
Thanks. And we've got one more slide.
I'm not sure if you, do you want the next slide? Okay.
Yeah. So just thinking about future steps, what we haven't said is what this is actually like for a small or low budget heritage organisation. For them, the challenges we've talked about are even greater. What do you do if you haven't got the level of expertise displayed at this conference so far? What if you have a very small staff? What if you can't afford to subscribe to Primo with its whizzing new knowledge boxes, or train one of your staff to spend the time contributing through the NACO funnel, or move all your records over to BibFrame? So just to let you know that at the University of Manchester, I'll be co-supervising 2 PhD students over the next few years looking at exactly these issues, as well as ways of incorporating linked open data into catalogue records. And I'd say that the very large number of superbly qualified cataloguers and library staff who applied for these studentships and the interest in today's conference suggests that this is something we all need to start thinking about and take seriously. And we hope that some of those missing from our records will soon become more easily visible and discoverable across institutions. Thanks very much for listening.
Oh, thank you, both of you. That was really, really fascinating. And I can see there are large numbers of questions in the chat. In the interest of getting through the questions a bit more quickly, can you both see them? You've both got access. You'd be happy to read them in the chat.
Let's see.
Let's start off with Emma Rothwell's collection about question about recruiting volunteers. How did you recruit the volunteers?
Well, we did it during COVID, and we actually had 90 applicants. We took a much smaller number. We took them in the order that they applied in so that we weren't discriminating. And we've written an article, which I see somebody's very helpfully put up on the chat that I wrote with Erica Delbeck about how we went about the project. It's called, I think for Emily, it's called Liberating the Collections. The Alpine Club library person has put it in.
Yes, put that in the chat. Yes, thank you to them, whoever they are. Next question is from Vance Woods. Are access points for previous owners added locally or in global arenas like OCLC? Can you both see that question? Who is that in? I think Harriet, is that one for you?
Sorry, I'm struggling to scroll through the chat.
Shall I read it out to you in that case?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, all right. Yes. Are access points for previous owners added locally or in global arenas like OCLC? And if the latter, how do you handle possible info overload in a bib record that applies as well to copies that do not share provenance?
So we add them locally to our records. Our records are shared over OCLC, but obviously depending, people will delete whatever's not applicable usually when they download records. So yeah, I don't know. I don't.
There's something. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we've got a bit of a lag here. There's something that's key to UCL, which is that UCL has separate bib records for each copy, and one of the reasons for doing that is to try to avoid exactly what you're describing there, Vance, which is that long string of different points for different copies. So we don't have that at UCL. We do have it at the John Rylands, where I also work, and it can get very unwieldy.
Thank you. Next question is from Karen Pierce, who asks, has creating NACO records become a routine part of cataloguing your collections, or are you just focusing on bringing to the fore the hidden individuals you've been talking about here? She also says she's really enjoying the talk, as have we all. As part of the NACO UK funnel, I know how much time the creation of NACO records can take.
So for me, it has been a somewhat routine part of my work. I would say it's about maybe half a day a week to a day, depending on what the workload is, and often dependent on what people need. If there's an actual need, if these works are going to be featuring really prominently in exhibitions or something, then I'd fast track them, for example, or if they're in teaching, you want all the records to be correct. But yeah, it is a sort of weekly duty for me. At the moment, I'm the only person who is NACO trained, but actually currently this month, I think, is the current NACO training, and there are a couple of other people at UCL who are being trained at the moment. So I imagine once more people are trained, that will be a routine part of our work, but not necessarily to the extent that someone like the British Library would be doing it.
And Bethany Slater wants to know how other libraries can get involved, or other cataloguers can get involved in NACO funnels, and is there any training for creating those authorities?
There is. So the NACO funnel, I think the best way is through the mailing list. I can share a link at some point, or someone else can. I know that Leeds are also involved. So anyone who can drop a link in the chat would be most welcomed. But it is a much simpler way to get involved than joining as an individual institution. I would encourage people to do so, because I imagine a lot of other people have had the same frustrations that I had as a cataloguer of going, well, some of these things are wrong and I can't do anything about it initially. I've only been submitting authorities for about a year, and I've worked as a cataloguer for about 10 years. So the frustrations built up a lot over time.
And then the next question is Wikidata being considered as a potentially more viable and less time-intensive option for the NACO entities?
Well, I might speak on that. So I feel quite strongly about this, given the vulnerabilities of Wikidata and Wikipedia, and the way that at the moment with Primo, that is becoming far more prominent. You don't get a knowledge box for a French National Dictionary of Biography, for example. You don't get a knowledge box for an older print only but much more reliable bibliography. But I would say the take-home message is focus on your Wikidata and your Wikipedia. That's a difficult job, because as we all know, it's quite hard sometimes to get changes made to Wikipedia, slightly easier for Wikidata. But I think this is going to start having to be something that's built in. But I really wish we could have a conversation with the designers of the discovery platforms about how we can get perhaps the authority file popping up rather than the Wikipedia article, because those 670s in the authority files often have a lot of really helpful references to resources on the history of printers, for example. But I think Harriet has a different view, so it would be interesting to hear from you, Harriet.
Not necessarily massively. I think I'm trying to remain neutral, but but I have been including Wikidata links when they exist to my Library of Congress authorities, and vice versa, putting the Library of Congress links into the Wikidata. Part of that is because I can see that sometimes I search for these names and they are already on Wikidata, even if they are things like quite hidden women printers and things, that the researchers will find it easier to add things to Wikipedia and Wikidata and things than, obviously, unless their librarians can't do anything with the authority files. That's not to say it's the absolute best option ever, but I think there often is quite a lot of data in there that is useful. I suppose the main thing is just people being aware of the fact that because everyone can edit it, it can also be wrong.
I think we've got time for a few more questions, so I'll press on if that's okay. The next question is, did you create project staff roles to undertake the research into records identified by your volunteers, or is it something that's being integrated into everyday work?
We had some fantastic volunteers with a whole range of different skills, actually, and different sets of knowledge. But a lot of that research was done by our initial volunteers, as Harriet mentioned, Sarah D'Amico, who went to the Bologna archives to have a look at the date when that widow inherited the business and found that the son, whose name is on the imprint, was only 6, 7, 8, something like that at the time. But obviously for people like Harriet, it's been a lot of extra research and we haven't got project staff at the moment. I know Andrew Watson's on the team and he manages Harriet's team. So, and I'm now at Rylands. So
I've got to be careful to not say anything too definitive. I'm not the manager in my team.
A quick question about Alma-D. So Vance Woods wants to learn more about the Alma-D work that you're doing. Is there a quick answer to that question?
It's brilliant.
It's really good. It's been really good, but I'm not sure there's a quick answer. But I would say we haven't put, of course, other people have put their emails and things. We can drop them in the chat. So if you want to reach out, we can discuss it more comprehensively.
We bought a scan tent which has internal light, and you can just put a mobile phone on top so as to get not professional images, but an image of an inscription or a book plate that the cataloguers didn't have time to identify or couldn't identify. They simply attach directly to the bib record. And then what I suppose the next stage would be to make a little form on the catalogue so that readers could fire in and say, I'm outraged that you didn't recognize this as so-and-so's inscription. And we'd say, thank you very much, and then add it. But I don't think Harriet's team haven't.
Well, there's almost a temptation sometimes, and I know you would massively disagree with this, Tabitha. There's almost a temptation sometimes to make an assumption that someone is a particular person because from experience, I think if you get something wrong, people are happy to leap to correct you. But if you just leave something unidentified, it's very difficult to get people to provide the information.
Yeah, I mean, having the images is superb, and a lot of people out there, it's their specialists, so they'll subject, and hopefully they'll get in touch, and it just saves a little bit, a whole day's research when you've got tight targets.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to abuse the power that I have and make it a question from me and just revisit these unnamed people who engage with books in various ways. And I wonder if you have any I mean, what you're thinking about how they can possibly be recorded in a way that makes them searchable. I know that the MEI database says 16th century annotator or 15th century rubricator, but those are very broad.
Well, those categories. And those are the people who've left their marks in the book. There were all the people who haven't yet. What I would like to see, and one of the things I'm doing some work on at the moment, is how we can try to integrate linked data without having to destroy all our mark records, so that we can link out to the kind of book history research and the scholarship research that might help to contextualize this without popping up a Wikipedia. I've taken against the knowledge boxes, haven't I?
You clearly have. Thank you very much to both of you. That was really, really fascinating. And I think there's a lot of going on in the chat, and I'm sure there'll be many more conversations about this in the future. Right, moving on to the last talk of the afternoon, which is Miquel Centelles from the University of Barcelona. Gloria can't be with us this afternoon. And Miquel is talking about her story, Nessie AI, designing inclusive metadata with hybrid AI for discoverability and epistemic justice.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It is truly a pleasure to join you at this conference. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our work. The project I'll discuss today sits at the crossroads of three different but interconnected domains: library and information science, artificial intelligence, from now on AI, and critical and feminist theory. The project is called History Nessie AI, Nessie for neurosymbolic, as Sada said before. At its heart is a very simple but very At its heart is a very simple but very powerful question. What if? Sorry. What if our catalogs didn't just describe collection, but actively repaired silences, giving voice to those who have historically been left out of history? This is the guiding question of our work, because catalogs are not only technical infrastructures, they are epistemic infrastructures. They shape not only what we can find, but also what we come to know, what we come to value, and what we collectively remember. Today, I want to share with you how we have been experimenting with inclusive cataloging standards, hybrid neurosymbolic AI systems, and participatory approaches to take this vision forward. Along the way, I will draw on 7 published research outputs from our team that provide the foundation of this work. You can find them on the section Publications of our research group website, Women and Wikipedia. Here is how I will structure the talk. First, I will discuss inclusive cataloging and metadata standards, and how critical feminist and intersectional perspectives reshape descriptive practices. Second, I will turn to artificial intelligence and metadata systems and share insights from the development of our hybrid neurosymbolic AI model. Third, I will reflect on surfacing hidden narratives, our methodological work with communities to embed their perspectives in metadata design. I will end with a set of reflections on the challenges and the opportunities ahead. Let me begin with cataloging. We often imagine cataloging as a technical, neutral practice, but critical and feminist cataloging scholarship has shown us that neutrality in description does not exist. Every taxonomy, every ontology, every subject heading system encodes choices, and these choices always have consequences. In our research, we looked closely at Wikipedia and Wikidata, two infrastructures at the core of today's open knowledge ecosystem. As of July 2025, Wikipedia is ranked as the 10th most frequently visited website worldwide. Likewise, Wikidata has been identified as the world's largest openly accessible knowledge graph. On Wikipedia, we studied the Italian and Catalan editions, Catalan and Italian, where categories such as woman or non-binary person are explicitly forbidden to use by the community after some deliberations and decisions processes. This means biographies cannot be grouped by gender identity in a straightforward way. The result is a structural invisibility. Women and gender diverse people are harder to locate, harder to analyze, and easier to forget. Wikidata, however, ontology is far more flexible. The gender pronoun as P21, P21 is the property for gender gender female, transgender male, and many more. By mid 2023, over 80% of human entities in Wikidata had some gender identity record. This inclusivity makes Wikidata as a far better basis for cataloging and semantic interoperability. This insight shaped a core decision in our project to anchor her study Nessie AI's metadata in Wikidata standards. By doing so, we align ourselves with both FAIR and CARE principles. FAIR focuses on data being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. CARE adds principles of collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. For us, these two sets of principles work together to ensure metadata is not only technically robust, but also socially accountable. But inclusivity is not just about categories. It is also about the methods we use to assign them. In another of our studies, we examine gender identification in scholarly publishing. Many bibliometric projects rely on automated services such as Gender APA, which infer gender from first names. We found that these methods systematically undercount women and often misgender non-binary identities. The effect is cumulative. Bibliometric statistics that appear authoritative are reproducing bias. This is a powerful reminder that cataloging practices are never neutral. They can entrench inequity, or they can help repair it. To repair, we need critical feminist-informed standards, human oversight, and transparency. Catalogs are not just about access, they are about recognition. So, when we speak of inclusive cataloging, we are speaking of cataloging as epistemic justice. Cataloging that acknowledges the silences of the past and designs systems that can prevent those silences from persisting into the future. Let me now move to generative artificial intelligence. AI has become an invisible infrastructure in our everyday lives. It shapes how we search, what we read, and increasingly what we believe to be true. For cultural heritage, AI can open new doors. It can generate new content, connect dispersed entities, and make hidden collections visible. But it also carries risks. It can reproduce bias, misrepresent history, and even fabricate data. So our question has been, how can we design AI that is accountable, transparent, and inclusive? Our answer is the development of a hybrid neurosymbolic AI model. Here is how it works. On one side, we employ large language models. These are excellent at generating text. For instance, They can take a bare archival record and produce a readable draft of a Wikipedia biography. But we know the risk. LLMs, large language models, hallucinate. They make things up and they reproduce the biases in their training data. So we anchor their outputs in a symbolic layer, knowledge graphs and ontologies. This combination is the neurosymbolic approach. It grounds a generative capacity in structured, verifiable data. The core mechanism is called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. When the system receives a query, it first retrieves relevant information from a accurate knowledge base, including ontologies and knowledge graphs. Then combines it with the prompt and only then generates a response. The response is thus guided by factual reference data. In short, the artificial intelligence doesn't just imagine, it cites. This design enables two core functions: generating draft Wikipedia articles from archival sources, especially about women and marginalized figures who are currently missing from the encyclopedia. And second, enriching metadata records by linking dispersed entities across silos. For example, if the same woman appears in several different Francoist repression archives, you know the Francoist was the dictatorship for 40 years in the Spanish history, the system can recognize her as the same person and consolidate her record. Regarding this second function, the function of enriching metadata records, we have learned that building an ontology and a knowledge graph from existing databases involves much more than technical mapping. Success depends critically on the quality and harmonization of the source data. Without consistent formats and shared conventions, integration becomes extremely challenging. This insight has two key implications for our work. First, when we design new databases, we need to apply a set of requirements that guarantee future compatibility with the knowledge graph model. This means paying attention to how table values are formatted, how metadata are named, and how the schema is defined as the SQL level, since relational databases are the main model we use to provide both data and metadata in this project. Second, we can go further by applying the Wikidata ontology directly when defining a database's data dictionary, using its entities and properties as the model for tables and attributes. For existing databases, this alignment must be done retrospectively. We have already begun this process with 3 of the databases contributing to our project. A database about international brigades in the Civil War, another about mass graves, and another about culture and censorship. For the first two, for the database about international brigades and mass graves, additional support will be required. For databases currently in development, such as Human Heritage at the University of Barcelona and Persecuted Midwives and Teachers, this alignment must be embedded in the data dictionary from the very beginning. Of course, the outputs are not perfect. They always require human validation, but they are significantly more transparent and reliable than those of the black box model. And here is the larger point. As we argued in our article From Silence to Spotlight, artificial intelligence is not only technical, it is political. Every design decision from which data sets we prioritize to which properties we include shapes how stories are told. Building accountable artificial intelligence for heritage collections means embedding ethics and reflexivity at every layer. We also discovered that by using Wikidata as a backbone, we achieve two things simultaneously: semantic interoperability and sharing inclusivity. In practice, this means our hybrid artificial intelligence system is not just more accurate, it is also more fair and ultimately more just. Let us now turn to what for us is the heart of the project: surfacing hidden narratives. Catalogs are not neutral inventories. They are creators of memory. If women, LGBT communities, or victims of state violence are absent from catalogs, they risk being forgotten altogether. So, how do we make sure catalogs surface these voices? The answer is not with algorithms alone, but with participatory design and co-creation. In her study, Nessie AI, we ran workshops with librarians, historians, Wikimedians, and citizen and scientists. Together, we map entities, refine ontologies, and co-create content. We ask simple but profound questions. What categories matter to you? Which stories must not be lost? This process transforms metadata design into a collective negotiation of meaning. Cataloging becomes not just a technical act, but a social and ethical one. One example comes from our work with archives on Francoist repression in Spain. These collections contain thousands of stories of women silenced by censorship, imprisonment, and persecution. By collaborating with descendants, activists, and scholars, we have designed metadata that foregrounds their experiences. We have linked fragmented records across multiple databases, and we have created new Wikipedia pages that bring their stories to an international audience. This is what we mean when we say metadata is memory work. It is about more than discoverability. It is about justice. It is about repairing epistemic silences and ensuring that the digital infrastructures of the future remember those who were silenced in the past. Of course, none of this is easy. We face three major challenges. First, data silos. Archives and research projects continue to produce fragmented standalone databases. Each has its own schema and metadata standards. This makes it difficult to connect entities across collections, undermining discoverability and synthesis. Tackling silos is both a technical and an institutional challenge. Second, bias in ontologies. Even relatively inclusive systems like Wikidata still reflect social inequities. Male-dominated professions remain the most represented. Women and non-binary figures remain comparatively underrepresented. So we cannot treat Wikidata as neutral. It must be continually critiqued, expanded, and corrected. Third, ethical participation. Co-creation sounds good in theory, but in practice it is complex. How do we avoid tokenization? Tokenization. How do we ensure that participation genuinely empowers communities rather than extracting their knowledge? This requires time, trust, and careful facilitation. It also requires recognizing the emotional weight of working with traumatic histories, such as state repression. These challenges remind us that inclusivity is not a final destination, it is a process, an ongoing negotiation between technology, community, and institutions. Let me close. What I hope you take away from this presentation is that cataloging is never just technical, it is epistemic. It determines whose voices are made visible and whose remain in silence. The Herstory Nessie AI project offers one model for doing this work differently. By adopting inclusive cataloging standards rooted in critical feminist and intersectional theory. By designing hybrid AI systems that are transparent, accountable, and grounded in verifiable data. And by embedding co-creation and citizen science to ensure that communities themselves shape the categories and the stories that represent them. Together, these approaches can transform special collections into spaces of recognition, accountability, and justice. Spaces where silence does not equal absence, but where silence are acknowledged, interrogated, and repaired. In short, Herstory Nessie AI shows us how to move from silence to spotlight. Before I close, I'd like to acknowledge that this work is part of the project Connecting Women's History to Neurosymbolic AI, an information architecture approach to the Francoist repression case study, funded by the Spanish Ministry of Science and the European Union through FEDER. And finally, for transparency. In preparing this presentation, we use GPT-5 for paraphrasing, rewording, and grammar checks. All material was then carefully reviewed and edited by the authors, who take full responsibility for the content. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mikel. That was fascinating and inspiring as well. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. So if people have any questions, if they can put them in a chat. I have a question about communities. So it seems that your project relies on communities, but it's also building communities. So your list of librarians, historians, Wikimedians, and citizen scientists was, like, I think I used the word inspirational already, but I love the, to get those people to work together is a real achievement. How did you identify those different parts of the community, those different contributors to your project? We were talking earlier about volunteers and UCL working with volunteers.
Yeah, we are working on it because we are in a technical stage of the system, working with the original databases transforming into a knowledge graph. And next semester we are beginning work with the co-creative process. Then we are going to identify definitely these groups, the historians, Wikimedians, and we are going to look at the best system to cast them and to bring to our project. We are thinking about focus group systems, meetings with the leaders of each of these groups, kind of social networking with them. We want to combine different systems to give more opportunities for all these people.
And what about capturing kind of oral histories and the knowledge that people still have of the communities that this material has come out of?
Yes, when the original databases for brigades, for so on, they are formal databases. They are created from archival records and so on. But they are also ask people to give more information about pictures in these databases, to recognize people in pictures in these databases, to complete records and so. And we want to use the neurosymbolic AI system to not correct, but to improve the information that all these kind of people will give to our system.
Thank you.
Okay.
Question, what training do you provide or have you provided to staff to ensure that participants and staff are able to navigate trauma and to make spaces safe?
Well, we have that kind of protocol, a guiding with some rules to don't convert the process in a like like a catharsis, but like a professional system. So we're thinking about and we are writing kind of protocols for all the people taking part in the system to do the best of from them. Okay, this is we know that sometimes we can be guilty of doing catharsis, not science, but I think we can do science from trauma of people, and this is our commitment.
Thank you. Michael, I don't know if you can see the chat, but there's a comment from Liz Fawcett at the end. And Liz says there's a project at our uni looking at the bias of AI in gender, for example, assuming gender in gender neutral languages. I think an example was Hungarian text, gender neutral, and AI giving roles like washing, she did the washing, and driving, he drove, assuming the pronoun gender. And Liz is asking if perhaps they can get in touch if they wish to compare their project outcomes with your project outcomes. Liz, could you perhaps put some contact details in the chat?
Of course.
Yeah.
The information about the name is Liz?
Liz Fawcett. I think if Liz could write something in the chat.
So, of course, I will take the contact and I will contact her to compare the projects, of course.
Okay, that seems like a
Thank
very
you very
good
much
Lancaster
for the
University.
proposal.
There we are.
Yes.
That seems like a very good note to end on. And can I just say thank you so much to all of our speakers this afternoon. It's been a really, really interesting set of talks, much to think about. And I think it seems that many of these issues are going to come up tomorrow, so we can carry on with the discussion tomorrow. And thank you also to the organisers, of course, to Rich and to Rian, who are working behind the scenes to keep this all running very smoothly. Thank you to both of you. And I think that probably is enough for this afternoon, and we will see you all tomorrow. Goodbye.